The inspiration for writing my first book, Topgun Days, came to me one evening when I was driving home from work, about a year after I retired from the Navy. We were approaching a milestone, 15 years since the release of the movie Top Gun, and which I had been involved with, and it was still being shown on TV, so I knew it was fairly popular, and I thought I'd write a magazine article about it. And then after just a few minutes, I thought, no, I'm going to write a book. So I went home, I mentioned it to my wife. She thought it was a good idea, and that's what started me on this project. Then my other two books, before Top Gun Days and Tomcat Rio, just tell the rest of the story. So that's where they all came from. Writing a book is not something that everybody does, but I think a lot of people have given it a thought. For me, I've written as part of my job in the Navy and since I retired, and so writing a book wasn't that big of a stretch. It was an agreeable challenge. I wanted the challenge of telling the stories that I experienced and of making them accessible and understandable to people in general, and also making them exciting. So it's been a fun process, and I also enjoyed thinking back and reliving my adventures while I was writing the books. I checked my records, and all of my books, all three of my books, have taken me an average of 1 month per chapter to write. So if one of my books is 20 chapters long, well, it took 20 months to write. And that some chapters have taken longer, and others have taken as few as 3 or 4 days. But the average over 3 books is about 1 month per chapter. My books are for a general audience. I wrote them so that anybody who can read would be able to understand them and to enjoy them. And that was part of my inspiration, was sharing the wonderful, exciting experience of naval aviation with a wide audience. My newer books, Tomcat Rio, I kind of shifted a little bit more and aimed towards the aviation enthusiast. So the person who has a little bit more understanding of terminology and activities, and I shifted the stories a little bit more that way also. Over the years since I've published my first book, I have heard from people who read that book or read my second book, and have it helped to nurture their enthusiasm for going into naval aviation. But I think some of the more interesting people who were affected by my books were those who give presentations as part of their job. And they read my books, and I described the preparation and the high standards that Top Gun instructors have for giving a Top Gun lecture. And several people have told me that they didn't realize how much preparation went into making a really good lecture into a great lecture, and they said it helped them to commit to doing a better job preparing for their own lectures. And I thought that was rewarding and interesting. For me, getting to fly the Tomcat was the culmination of a dream of more than 10 years. I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was starting around 10 or 12 years old. When I was in college, my eyesight went bad, so I could not be a pilot. And then the Navy was bringing out the F-14. It was brand new, and I learned that the person in the back seat could wear glasses. So I said, so I shifted my goal, and that became my goal, to become a radar intercept officer, or RIO, in the F-14 Tomcat. So when I got my wings in Pensacola and I received orders to F-14 training, I knew that I was almost there. Then when I finally, when I got to the RAG and when I started flying the Tomcat, and I got to fly this incredible, magnificent machine, I felt like I, was on the verge of really realizing my dream. But then, as anyone who's flown in the Navy knows, at each step, you realize that you are just beginning to learn a whole new level of material and of competency and skill. And so, there were always more challenges ahead of me. But at least when I was in the RAG, when I went to my first fleet squadron, I had realized my dream of flying the F-14 Tomcat. And it was actually better than I ever could have imagined. The things that I loved most about being in naval aviation were being part of a fighter squadron. It's a great group of people, and to be a member of a squadron is just an incredible experience. Another thing that I liked the most was to experience or to encounter challenges such as becoming proficient at missions and learning new missions, and be able to meet these challenges. And then something else that I liked was also going on deployments and flying out in the big wide world. For me, it was the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and then later the Persian Gulf, and just flying in these new parts of the world and stopping in ports in places that I had only heard about, and some of them I really had hardly even heard about, and becoming familiar with these parts of the world. I mean, it was just, it was an incredible experience. Something that I liked least about being in naval aviation was going on deployment. I know it's also something that I said I liked the most, but going on deployment meant that you leave everything that you know and that you hold dear, and you leave it for 6 months or more. And I'm not complaining, because I knew that going on deployment was part of the deal, and I, it's part of naval aviation, and there were a lot of good parts about it. But I am saying that because our men and women in the service, those before me and those who are still in the service, are making a big sacrifice by doing their jobs when they go overseas for deployments, either combat or routine deployments. And I respect that, and I think that they would appreciate if we all acknowledged their sacrifice. My 3 favorite military planes. Well, right off the bat, I'm going to leave out the 2 types that I have the most flight time in. One is the F-14 Tomcat, and the other is the F-5F Tiger II. They are very different aircraft, but they're both very cool. I thought they were cool looking, great to fly, and I like them for different reasons. So just to talk about some different airplanes, my sentimental favorite would probably be the F-8 Crusader. I liked it. It was really the first plane I fell in love with when I was a teenager, even though there was no chance I was going to get to fly it because of my age, and then also because my eyesight went bad. I still think the F-8 is a very cool airplane. Second on my list would be the F-11, the Grumman Tiger, which I think is the best looking fighter ever designed, ever built. I know it wasn't that successful in service. The Blue Angels flew it for many years, but it's still a beautiful airplane, and I've talked to pilots who flew it, and they enjoyed it. My third airplane on this list is going to be the Convair F-106 Delta Dart. I mean, what person who likes aviation doesn't like that sleek look? It looks like a spaceship. It had tremendous performance and capability, especially considering when it was introduced. I know I've left off a lot of classics and a lot of airplanes that are perennial favorites, both older and newer, but those are my 3. I was in the Navy just over 20 years, and for me, 3 of the highlights would be 1, getting my wings of gold as a naval flight officer and receiving my orders to F-14 training, which happened about 1 year after I was commissioned. Second highlight was when I became a Top Gun instructor, and that happened about 5 years after I was commissioned. It was at the completion of my first F-14 squadron tour, and it was the beginning of an incredible 2.5-year tour as a Top Gun instructor. My third highlight would then be serving as the commanding officer of Fighter Squadron 211, the Fighting Checkmates, which I was the CO in 1997 and 98, late in my career as usual, and that was an incredible honor. I think the most common feedback that I get from my books is that people are surprised at some of the detail that I can put into some of the recollections. And I have a secret for that. One is that I have my flight logbooks, which hopefully all pilots and RIOs have, and it tells about your flights, the dates, and you can find other information in there. But for me, another thing that I have that helped me out was I used to keep little date books, a habit that I got from my father. And you can see I wrote my flight time in there for my flights. And when I was on a good flight that was memorable, I would sometimes write a little note about it. Another thing that I did, I'm not really a pack rat, but I kept a few things that were important, and they happened to help me when I was writing a book. For example, in my book before Top Gun Days, and I think I mentioned it in Top Gun Days also, I mentioned that I used to keep my own personal little notebook debriefing myself on flights. And here are some of those pages where I wrote the flight number and what I felt about my performance, things I did bad and things I did good. Those are some of the documentation that I have that helped me to put detail into the book. In addition, and anyone who's had adventures is going to experience this, I wrote about the events that made the biggest impression on me, and those are the ones that I can remember in great detail. Not so much working on another book. I just finished my third book a few months ago, and it's called Tomcat Rio. It talks about the rest of my career after my time as a Top Gun instructor when I went back to VF2 and VF211. The book is scheduled to come out this year. It was delayed some by the coronavirus and the effect that had on the publishing industry, but it's already available for pre-sale, and my publisher says they will get it out as soon as they can. When they give me a date, I will put that information on my website, on Facebook, and every other social media platform that I can think of. If you like the sound of Top Gun Days and before Top Gun Days, please consider buying copies from your online retailer. They're available as print books, e-books, and audiobooks. Thank you.